parts of my day I get to interact with you. Guys, we're going to start off today with a little bit of reminders of your to-dos, and we're also going to talk, because we had some negotiation in the last class. For those of you just joining the class, we had a sort of union negotiation between the union and management to determine how we're going to run this class. And we made some changes. I'm going to be talking about, in the second slide, what concessions I have chosen to make to the workers in this particular company. So, before I get there though, guys, get the text. If you have not gotten the text for this class, you need the text for this class. Whether you get it through Cengage Unlimited or you get a hard copy, whatever works for you, we're going to be reading these chapters, and it's going to be making up our experience in learning the labor movement in the United States. So go ahead and start reading chapter 1. Now you'll notice that the due date for your first assignment is not Labor Day. The due date is 2 days after Labor Day, which means you're not going to have Monday assignments, which maybe means you won one of your demands. So in terms of the list of demands that you guys gave me, the work rules we talked about, I'm going to go down these one by one. The first request was, could we do online Fridays? I cannot commit to doing an online Friday every week. It's not that I would not enjoy it. That's something I would have had to establish with the administration prior to starting this class. Otherwise, somebody from the administration might wonder why every day at 10 o'clock Tonkin is not in his classroom doing his job. So as I like being employed, I can't do that. That being said, I am considering occasionally doing some online days with this class. I can't commit to every Friday, but could I commit to some occasional online days? We might be able to do that. In terms of online tests, that's a very possible option. For those who are just joining the class right now, the question was, can we, instead of doing in-class tests, could we do an online open book, open notes test when we do our tests? I am open to that possibility, and I'm open to it for a couple of reasons. Number one, I never want tests to seem punitive. If you are able to show me that you're learning the material and give me something to evaluate you by, I don't have that much of a bias whether or not we do it in class. That being said, if I make an online test, I may include some short answer in there, so I'm seeing that you're assimilating the material instead of just multiple choice and true and false, which would still make up the bulk of the test. So that is a possible option. You guys really are going to be the determining factor. Between now and chapter 3, the more you're an active part of this class, the more I can be convinced that's a viable option. In terms of the no weekend homework, done. You guys got your demand there. There will never be an assignment that's due on Monday, with the exception being if I extend a deadline. If I extend a deadline, then yeah, it might be a Monday, but a standing deadline will never be the day after a weekend. So you guys got your first demand. The question was, can we get rid of papers? Here's my response. I think we can probably reduce the number of papers we're doing in this class and supplement them with alternative activities. That means more things we're doing in class, maybe discussion boards, maybe even YouTube or facilitated discussions by members of this class. So I'm listening to you guys. We're going to revisit these demands every chapter and see what kind of progress we're making. I'm going to expect you to hold me accountable just like I'm holding you accountable. So is this good, guys? Pretty reasonable. We kind of met in the middle here. There was something that I wanted to do as an illustration last time we were in class. Guys, this is sort of how negotiation generally works. Between people, between companies, and in marriages, actually. Usually, this is what one person wants, and this is what the other person wants. And usually, it comes out somewhere in the middle. Now, the depth of which that arrow goes, the direction in which the arrow goes, is dictated by who has the power and who is a shrewder negotiator. One of the reasons, for example, that people promote unions is the idea being, if we are negotiating, do we have a better chance of success if there are more of us on one side of the equation? And that is one of the key arguments behind people who support unions. In marriages, it's seldom democratic. So, guys, we're going to start off with a little bit of current events today because we're talking about unions. When we think about unions, we think of coal mines, we think of healthcare. Sometimes we don't think about the communications workers of America. So we're going to start off with a little bit of current events I'm familiar with till we started discussing it now. Tell me some things you noticed about what happened here. Why are these folks going on strike in the first place? Yes?
They seem upset that AT&T just isn't willing to send the proper representation to negotiate with them, which is understandable.
That's exactly right. So when we talk about these individuals, are they bargaining as individuals or are they bargaining as a unit? Yeah, collective. That's where the term collective bargaining comes from. So what this group of people is trying to do is essentially put leverage on their employer to say, we want to negotiate a new contract. What collective bargaining means, again, like we used in the candy example last Monday, the more people that get together have a stronger, supposedly stronger ability to bargain with a company. What they're saying is that AT&T itself was unwilling to come to the table and bargain with them. What else did you guys notice about the video? Even the visuals or what you saw happening here. Is there anything that stuck out to you? Yes?
They put a big emphasis on trying to get the word out to other people who are not directly involved.
Exactly right. Why are they doing that?
I guess it's like public relations and stuff.
Exactly right. So why do you think, and you nailed the point, why is public relations an important consideration for people who run labor unions? Go for it.
Because the word is all about perception and how customers perceive your company to be is how it will be.
Exactly right. So from watching that video, what's your first impressions of the union or of AT&T? Does anybody have any first impressions? You had to have a reaction. Watch the video. What impressions do you have? Sir?
I mean, the one lady they were interviewing, she did seem genuinely disappointed that, they didn't send anyone who had any kind of authority to make a decision or bargain. So they essentially just sent someone to talk. And it shows that they didn't really think that this was a big problem.
Mm-hmm. Did you guys notice, by the way, she was wearing a T-shirt that represented her union? She was even doing the public relations there. I thought she was very well-spoken. I thought she came across as very calm and reasonable. What message did AT&T send by not sending a person to respond to this stuff? Elliot?
It looks like they're hiding something or they're trying to push away the issue. They don't want to address it.
Yeah, they're basically saying, rather than run the risk of looking bad personally, we're just going to take our hands off of this and not even appear at all. I don't think it's a very positive message from the company. Now, when you saw the pictures of the strikers, did this look like a big event or did it look small? It looked pretty small. I would say if I were the union, I would have seen that part of this video as a public relations fail. Lots of people massing around and basically making their presence felt, that would make an impression. Those folks almost seemed a little lackadaisical, almost a little tired of what they were doing. The point is, guys, a lot of the time this is everything to do with public relations and public opinion. Sometimes public opinion of unions is, these folks are making more money than we are, I don't support these folks. The teachers union, for example, has faced that kind of stereotyping in the past. And if you get into regions such as central Pennsylvania, sometimes they don't always have positive opinions of unions either because of previous history. So there's enough to go on both sides of this. The stuff that goes into this kind of PR war we're going to be talking about starting today. So we're getting into chapter 1. Guys, what we really need to start off with, these are some key concepts. And we're going to be talking about these throughout the class. This is framing the class. You, as individuals, have the right to organize. People in the United States have the right to organize. That's one of the legal constructs of this country. That means that unlike the days of the 1800s and the pre-union eras in the United States, unions are not illegal. You can organize, you can vote, you can be a part of a union. The flip side is that companies have a right to protect their own interests. These are laws we're going to be learning throughout the class. We're going to be talking throughout the class and up to your final assignment here when we do an actual collective bargaining agreement, how people negotiate. What are the tactics that people use? What's effective? What's the court of public opinion like? We're also going to be talking about the limitations of an agreement. Has anybody ever had a job so far in their life? Have you ever been working with somebody and asked them to help you and received this response? That's not my job, buddy. Raise your hand if you've ever heard that response. Well, sometimes if you're in a non-union environment, that can simply mean you're working with somebody who is not going above and beyond and does not want to help you. In a union environment, it could be, this is the term of the agreement, this is my job description, this is what I am contractually obligated to do. And we're going to talk about how we administer these agreements, how this stuff carries out. For example, let's say you work in a union shop, and we're getting ahead of ourselves a little because we're going to be talking about this stuff later in the class. Let's take a union versus a non-union environment. So we got a non-union environment here, and we got a union environment here. I'm going to pick on Ryan because he's right up front here. What's Ryan's main path to promotion in a union environment? Anybody know? Yeah, if he's been here longer, he's got a better chance at getting promoted. I'm going to pick on Emily because she's over here. She's in a non-union environment. What's her path to promotion in most modern organizations? How does she get promoted? Skills, desirable work ethic, proving yourself individually. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to both, and those are not absolute paths. For example, you can be in a union environment and still have to have the right qualifications to get a promotion. Or you could be in a non-union environment where people still kind of regard seniority as your path. These are not absolutes, and not one is bad or good. They are just hallmarks of these types of environments. So guys, I know this is a little hard to see, but in terms of everything you're going to learn this semester, it all goes into one big continuum. The effectiveness or the popularity of unions is affected by how good is the economy right now. If everybody's happy and making a good wage and being treated well, are we likely to unionize? No. Why bother? If I'm fat and happy and I'm making a good paycheck, what am I worried about? Technology is another aspect. When I say technology in the workplace and where that's a concern for unions, what am I talking about? Elliot.
Is it that people who are, let's say, in a lower skilled job are afraid that their job might get swept away with technology?
Yep, I'm talking about a word that starts with an A. What word am I talking about? Automation, absolutely. When you think about it, guys, who here has ever taken the School of Business trip to Wall Street? If you go to Wall Street, and this is, I promise I'm going somewhere with this, who here has ever seen a movie about the stock exchange? Will you describe to me, what's it like on the floor of the stock exchange in the movies? People are running around with ticker tape and making phone calls and saying, for God's sakes, we've got to drop this stock like a hot potato. They probably don't say that. They probably swear more, but I'm not going to swear in this class. Not much. Anyway, and in reality, if you go to the floor of the stock exchange, it's dead quiet, guys, because all those trades are automated now. They're all being done by computer, and the same thing is happening with technology in general. Our labor market means, do we have skilled labor available in our region? If you're in Detroit, if you wanted to start a car company in Detroit, would you find people who are ready to work there? Hell yeah, you would. If you started a car company in Loretto, Pennsylvania, probably not. We don't have the right labor market. And the products that we're selling in the international markets too. Right now, guys, this could be a good time for organized labor in this country for some aspects, because what's going on between the United States and another big economic power right now? Yes? You got it, man. And that trade war is affecting the way we make things in this country. I'll give you a great example that hits close to home and my heart. There's a beer keg manufacturer in Pittsburgh that can't get steel and aluminum from China, which is where they get most of their products from, ironically, in Pittsburgh. And so they're having to raise the price of their kegs to pay for tariffs. And so that affects how many people they hire. That affects how industry works. And then we get into what we refer to as public opinion. All the stuff we were talking about with that video. What do you think about those people? What do you think about those folks on the picket line? What do you think about the company? And then we get into the inner circles of this stuff. Management, negotiation, and administrators. These are the people who are trying to keep their companies running. If you are running a company in 2019 in the United States, what are the things that keep you up at night? I'm not talking about the average worker. I'm talking about the CFO, the CIO, the CEO, the people in the C-suite. What are they concerned about in 2019? What are the things that keep them up? Take a guess, guys. Keep in mind, our interactions here will determine the state of our tests later. So the more you speak, the better chance we're not going to have regular tests. Yes. The question is, if you were in the C-suite, if you were the CEO, the CIO, the CFO for a company in 2019 in the United States, what are the things that keep you up? What are your concerns?
I feel like if I'm a CEO, something social media keeps me up at night just because even if it's something that you as a company don't really endorse or recommend, like an employee can wild out basically, and that's a reputation to the company to see.
So you're talking marketing and public relations. What else?
I was going to say something similar, just like overall public perception. So even if you might be treating your workers well,
That's exactly right. Why is that such a big concern in 2019 if we're appealing to new workers? Because you're right on the money. What's the unemployment rate right now, guys? So is it employees or an employer's market? It's an employee's market. So can I get the skilled people I need into my company in the first place to do what I need to do? Can I manufacture lean? Can I be efficient? Can I make cars less expensively than somebody in China who's going to be flooding my market with their cars within the next decade? All these are things that we're thinking about. How do we keep our relationships with suppliers and customers? If I'm a union rep, I'm thinking the exact opposite. If I represent a union that represents employees, who is my number one concern? The employees. The people who are paying their union dues, the people who are paying me to represent them and to make sure they get the best deal possible. What's the biggest expense we're talking about in 2019 for benefits for employees? What's the biggest expense? You got it. Guys, check this out. If you want to talk about what's keeping unions and companies up, let's say you got your first job out of college at St. Francis and you were making $100,000 a year. I'd love it if you guys all got $100,000 jobs and started scholarships in my name. That'd be wonderful. But how much is your job actually worth when you add the benefits? Yes?
About 130.
You got it. So this is a big deal, guys, and the price of healthcare is going up, not down, because everybody's living longer. So, guys, those are the things that all fit into our continuum of union and labor. Guys, one of the biggest reasons that we have negotiations between employees and employers, whether they're union or not, is the creation of what we refer to as work rules. Work rules set the way in which we interact in the workplace. For example, we did some negotiation on Monday and we created some work rules, some things that we generally accept are the ways we work together. If you had to say your relationship as a student to me as an instructor, what are some general things that we accept about our relationship? Yes? So position, and that's something that may change as we get through the course of the semester. I might be sitting in those chairs watching you guys present more. I hope so. So what else is a traditional term of work rule in our classrooms or in our classes? Help me out, guys. What's something we always sort of accept? Yes?
Professors usually don't talk anymore.
And we're going to change that rule too, I hope, too. But it's a generally expected practice. It's a generally expected practice. Do you guys grade your own work or do I grade your work? Not a bad idea. We'll see how well this works out. But I grade your work and you guys participate. Those are general expectations. It's a general expectation if I go to work for Sheets Corporation. If I have signed on the dotted line that I'm going to work for $9 an hour, then I'm going to work $9 an hour, 40 hours a week, and I'm going to go to a safe work environment. I'm going to get vacations. I'm going to get paid overtime. Some of these are government rules. Some of these things are individual to companies. If you're a part of a union, for example, you may sign what we refer to as a no-strike clause. And what that means is you have agreed as a union that you will not go on strike so long as the company is operating in good faith. You will continue to negotiate. Very common. Here's the other thing that you guys may not realize at this point in time. We haven't talked about the term of arbitration yet. But it's going to affect a lot of you in this world. Has anybody heard, I won't call on you, I just want to see if you heard the term. Has anybody ever heard the term arbitration before? Does anybody know what it means? Corey, what is it?
I kind of know from the sports aspect. I know like in baseball, they kind of like really agree on the contract, they get like an arbitrator. And kind of like, I feel like an arbitrator, I think, is responsible to basically set the market, like what is this player actually worth, and are they not paying him?
That's a fantastic explanation, by the way. Absolutely correct. Let's put it into a general business context. Let's say, for example, Corey owns a company, and I go to work for him. My first day of work, he gives me a contract to sign that says a no-sue arbitration clause. Here's what that means. If I have a grievance with my employer, even though I'm not in a union, I have signed away my right to take Corey to court. Why would the employer want that? Why would they want to make me go to an arbitrator instead of going to court? Exactly, it's cheaper. It's going to cost you less. And that's a new movement we're going to be talking about in this class about the reasons why employers are asking employees to sign arbitration agreements, even those folks who are not in unions. Some of the characteristics we have of work rules. Some are what we refer to as common. That means it's a common expectation that you're going to show up when work's supposed to start, you're going to leave when it's done. It's common and it's under the law that you're going to be paid overtime if you work more than 40 hours a week and you are an hourly employee. There are unique work regulations or work rules. For example, if you work in an atomic power plant, one of the rules of work is you get time to put on your protective apparatus. I don't need protective apparatus. I don't get paid for the time I'm putting on my tie every morning, no matter how much I've tried to negotiate for it. Your rules can be open to interpretation or they can be very specific. Who here knows who Mary Barra is? Oh, you got to learn about this lady. For the ladies in the audience here, Mary Barra is the CEO of General Motors. She is the first female CEO of an American car company and one of the most powerful people in the world. General Motors, when she came to work there, had a 12-page dress code. She changed it to one sentence. The sentence she said was, dress appropriately. And that's an example of changing from a specific to a vague kind of work rule. And these rules change over time because our companies change. Guys, 10 years ago, a lot of companies didn't have any kind of general rules on technology. Now we've got rules about what we can do in the workplace, what devices we can bring in. Guys, can anybody think, with this discussion, what are some common rules that you could expect any place you went to work in the United States? What are some things that would jump out to you saying, I should be able to expect this no matter where I go? I'll give you a hint, Labor Day is coming up. Yes?
No drinking.
I think that most people would expect they're not going to get to drink on the job, unfortunately. With one exception. Has anybody here ever heard of Straw Brewing Company in St. Mary's, Pennsylvania? Straw Brewing Company is one of the oldest breweries in the United States. They have a part of their brewery called the Eternal Tap, which literally is a fresh tap to their beer, which up until 5 years ago, I think it was about 5 years ago, any employee was welcome to go and drink from any time during the day. You literally could drink as much as you wanted on the job so long as you were functional. They have limited it now to 1 beer per day. If you live in the town of St. Mary's and you are of age, you are entitled to 2 free beers per day. So it's not universal. I wish we had an Eternal Tap right here. But by like 11 o'clock, these lectures would be awesome. You guys would be like, we're taking Concord for everything. This guy's off his rocker. He's out of taking me out the front door. Dr. Logan being here with me would be fantastic. But what would be another example of a common work rule? What's something we can expect anywhere in the country? Yes?
Getting certain holidays off.
Yeah, and it's one of those things it's not without controversy. Because, for example, most of the holidays we get off, other than government holidays, what kind of holidays do they tend to be?
They tend to be like vacation holidays, times where people are traveling, they want to, maybe go out.
For sure. And I would argue 2 Christian holidays. Because, for example, school districts, companies, a lot of them will close on Christmas. We don't see a lot of companies in rural regions anyway honoring Hanukkah. I mean, even in our school, we don't honor Labor Day. So, I mean, they vary greatly by institution, but generally speaking, government holidays. What's another rule that we could expect anywhere in the country, more or less? I'll give you a hint, Labor Day. Not just having it off. What was Labor Day all about, guys? Yes?
Was that hours of the work week?
Exactly. Prior to the Fair Labor Standards Act, we did not have a 40-hour work week in the United States. We also didn't have minimum wages for employment, and we also didn't have minimum ages for employment. I will show you pictures from the 1920s and 1910s where you can see children as young as 10 or 12 years old working in coal mines. That was legal in the early 20th century in the United States. In terms of a 40-hour work week, if you are an hourly employee and you work over 40 hours in the United States, what are you entitled to? At what rate? You got it. You're entitled to time and a half. You're also entitled to what they refer to as compensatory time, meaning if you do not want paid, you want time off in the amount of 1.5 hours per extra hour work. It is at the discretion of the employee, not the employer, and almost all employers get that wrong. Give me one more. What's one other thing that we should be able to expect as a common work rule in the United States? I'll give you a hint. Hand railings, floor mats. Helmets. Yes?
Safe accommodation.
A safe work environment. We have every right to expect that we're not going to be putting ourselves into peril by going to work, other than things that we have signed up for. For example, if you work in a nuclear power plant, you sign a contract. I think most of them are 2-year contracts. After 2 years, you have to leave for the chance that you might have been exposed to excessive amounts of radiation. So there are specific requirements in that regard. By the way, guys, you guys who are not from Pennsylvania, you're 2.5 hours away from the worst nuclear accident in American history, 3 Mile Island, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Yeah, it almost was a meltdown, quite literally. So, guys, these are some examples. I don't expect you to read this on the screen. It's right out of your text. But things that we have as rules of work. For example, if you work at a government installation, you may have a dress code. You may have minimum appearance standards. If you're an electrician, it means that you're setting work rules, for example, that you might get paid for your travel time to and from an institution. If you work in healthcare, you would be provided with protective apparatus from infectious diseases, so on and so forth. By the way, guys, if you want to know about work rules, in the United States, what's the largest athletic player union? I wouldn't call the NCAA a union, although it behaves like it sometimes. I would argue that it would probably be the NFL, but the NBA is a large union too. Those players have serious leverage. We're going to be doing actually a case study on how the NFL was holding out against owners and resulted in some downtime for play as well. There were times in the history of the United States, players haven't taken the field over strikes. There are work rules. If you're in the NFL, by the way, what is the biggest area of concern they have for their players at this point in time? Health. What specifically? Concussions. Because we're basically saying after all these years, maybe those helmets were not doing as good of a job as we wish they would. Guys, as I like to do, we're about a little overdue. We're about half hour into the class. So I'm stopping for our first opportunity for a question from each side of the room for today. So who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Please. I'm not. I am a non-union employee. We do not have a teachers union here at St. Francis. My wife, however, is a member of a healthcare union. She's a member of SEIU, which is a healthcare union for the local UPMC hospital in Altoona. So she's been on the picket line, and it's been one of those things that the negotiations have definitely gotten ugly from time to time. So good question. Question or comment from this side of the room, please. Need to hear from you guys. Oh, go ahead, Adam. You're raising your hand.
I was gonna say, do you know where, like what country or even what region, if it was here, the union kind of originated, I guess?
When we get into the history of the unions, you'll see a lot of the history came from Europe and England in particular. They were the folks who really started standing up to employers, and where a lot of this stuff came out to. And I always look to my friend Elliot back here because he's the historian in this group. But when we started getting into the Industrial Revolution, that's when we started really seeing potential abuses of people. Unions, when they came into being, were sometimes literally about physical protection. The idea that people were being worked to death or working in unsafe conditions. The labor union movement in the United States has paid dividends, and the fact that we do have things like the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and we have a minimum wage. To draw some comparison, several years ago, there were folks who died in garment factory fires in Bangladesh, in India. And they died in those fires not because there weren't stairs or exits. They died in those fires because the employers had locked the doors from the outside so employees could not leave to take breaks. So literally people in India, in a foreign country, burned to death because they were locked into a factory that was burning down. So that's the difference in terms of some of the positive change the labor unions have made versus countries where maybe we haven't had that kind of positive change. And when I say that, I always need to give the caveat. I am not pro or anti-union. I am neutral for the purposes of this class and expect you to make up your own opinion. But that was an excellent question. Are there any other questions before we continue, guys? Again, the more we talk, the less chance we get a test, guys. Guys, in terms of people who are part of this whole process, management officials, basically we're talking about people who have the title manager or supervisor or CEO, somebody who is part of the management chain. Not specifically every company, but the guys with ties usually are not members of the union. So these are people who manage the way the work is done. And they also sometimes, when they hear of a union trying to come into a facility, will also either act as union avoidance officers themselves or even get consultants to come in to try to keep a union from forming. Now, union officials are people who are elected by the rank and file of a union who will try to organize. People who are union organizers, for example, may distribute literature. For example, they were trying to form a teachers union at St. Francis. I might, on the way to my car, have somebody handing me a flyer trying to get me to go to a meeting, for example. That's very common. And employees ultimately are the people who make these decisions. Employees decide whether or not they're going to unionize. There was a big European car company in the southern United States that had a factory that's tried to organize twice, and the employees actually voted not to unionize. This would be a great bonus question. Anybody know what company I'm talking about? It's a European car company, popular in the United States. Yes? Good guess. I'm thinking, yes.
Volkswagen?
It was Volkswagen. Yes, and Volkswagen, basically the union, the United Auto Workers, tried twice to organize and failed both times. The workers themselves felt they were well treated and did not need representation from a union. So sometimes people don't vote in unions. And then we get into the other parties who are part of this. The government, the executive, legislative, and judicial branches all make laws and enforce laws and interpret laws involving whether or not we're allowed to organize. For example, if you have a president, when I say this, guys, I'm not telling you what your political beliefs should be. Generally speaking, you have Republicans and Democrats. Of those two parties, which is generally more pro-union? Any guesses?
Democrat?
Democrats are generally more pro-union and historically have been associated with blue collar, although that's been changing too. Generally speaking, Republicans have been associated with anti-union movements, although that's changing as well because a lot of unions, for example, a lot of rank and file, were supporters of President Trump because of his trade policies. A lot of unions are not supporters of President Trump because he does not favor strong legislation supporting unions. So it's a much more complicated environment than it would have been 20 years ago when this stuff was kind of cut and dry. But the bottom line is that the government, federal and local, interprets the laws involving whether or not people can organize and how. Then we get into what we refer to as third-party neutrals. Your tax dollars pay for this stuff, guys, so that we can have mediators and arbitrators. Mediators are people who come in basically with no power. Let's say, for example, both sides of this room decided they didn't like each other very much, and we needed to work it out. As a mediator, I can come in with no power over any of you and try to get you to talk to each other. An arbitrator, on the other hand, does much the same process, but has legal power to basically say, if you're trusting a third-party arbitrator, if that is your agreement, like Corey, I'm working for his company and I signed that agreement, that arbitrator can have the final say. So the difference between a mediator and an arbitrator is a mediator offers suggestions, an arbitrator can be the final decision maker. Does that make sense, guys? These are basic concepts, guys. So in terms of where we get into the labor movement in the first place, we assume that we live in a capitalist system. When I say the United States is a capitalist economy, what does that mean to you? Somebody who hasn't spoken up yet. Just tell me what capitalism means to you. What is capitalism? You're all in business school. You hope you know what capitalism is. I think I know what it is. What's capitalism? Otherwise, I'm going to randomly call on somebody. We'll get your opinion on capitalism, and it's going to be Tanner. Tanner, what's capitalism?
Yeah, no.
It's okay not to know. That's how we learn. Is anybody else help Tanner out? What's capitalism? Yes, sir.
It's a system of commerce where the means of production are privately held.
Exactly right. Capitalism basically means I can make stuff or provide services and sell them at a profit. And I should be able to have very little impediments to my doing so. How does this benefit employers? Well, employers technically can keep all the profits. Employees sometimes have a conflict with this, saying, you're making these big profits, and yet here I am making a minimum wage. Guys, there was one particular group of employees from a particular industry that's been pushing for a higher minimum wage over the last 2 or 3 years. Who am I talking about? Fast food workers. They're basically saying, look, we make your food, we're highly responsible, we should be making more than $7.25, $7.50, $8.50 an hour. The company's response to this this particular initiative has been what in some cases? Other than imposing, what else have these companies been doing? Well, some of them have. Like in Seattle, for example, it was mandated. Has anybody been to a McDonald's with touchscreen ordering? Why do you think that's happening, guys? Exactly. So one of the responses in the 21st century to push back is to say, if you're going to push for higher wages, we're going to automate. Now, some of the other assumptions are, though, is that employees can organize, that they can apply for jobs wherever they want, they can seek a better job. And the compromise between the two, if you've got the leverage of the employer who has the job and pays the wages, and you've got the employee who is beholden somewhat to the employer. An employer's response basically is, if you don't like it here, negotiate for a higher wage or go somewhere else. An employee's response can be, I'm going to go somewhere else, or I'm going to organize and demand a higher wage, which is the birth of the labor movement, guys. That's why we have it in the first place. So in terms of some of the things, this is, again, out of your text, I'm expecting you to read this stuff. I'm not going to go through this entire slide other than to say it is perfectly legal in the United States to organize into a union. It is perfectly legal in the United States to use collective bargaining power to put economic pressure on an employer. And an employer, so long as they're not breaking the law, can pay any wage they want so long as it meets a minimum standard. There are even jobs in the United States we don't even have to pay minimum wage. Could somebody think of an example of a time when we don't have to pay minimum wage if we're an employer? Yes? Yeah, if you can show that these folks get tips, I can pay beneath minimum wage for that. There's one other example too. Yes? Seasonal companies? Yep. And actually, then there's two more then. One other. What is it?
Is it companies under a certain amount of employees?
They can get under the minimum wage too, and family businesses. Family businesses, basically, you might as well say that you are working for your family for whatever they're paying you, because a family business can get away with that as well. Some of the other things that we can do, though, too. The government at this point in time really is a big fan of final and binding arbitration. What that means is, instead of having a long, drawn-out negotiation process, we get somebody to split the difference and have a government certification that they can enforce the decisions that are being made between labor and between the companies themselves. We're going to hit a couple more points for today, guys. Some of the other things that influence work rules. One is the state of the economy. Like right now, guys, tell me one more time. What's the unemployment rate in the United States? Who's got the power? Employees, potentially, particularly you guys. You're going to be entering the workforce as skilled employees. You're going to be bringing particular leverage into the marketplace. So the state of the economy. Are we manufacturing more? Are we selling more? Is retail strong? The labor market is as a secondary part of it. Do we have the right skills to be able to do this stuff? Let me give you an example. Right now, if you had to pick the fastest growing parts of our economy, what are things that would jump out to you as things where we're seeing significant growth? Where are we seeing significant growth in the economy? Where's everything going? Technology. If you want to know the number one source of opening up work visas to people to emigrate to the United States, software development, computer security, anything involving tech. We've got a shortage of those folks in this country, which means those folks are in high demand. The things that are not in high demand like they used to be, we're not doing as much retail. Guys, if you want to know why your local shopping mall looks like a ghost town, it's one word. It's called Amazon, because that's a changing market demographic. So we don't have demand for people running cash registers. We don't have demand for people who are working at the Gap in the mall. We do have demand for people who can do computer programming. And the product market itself, how vulnerable are we to disruption? Let me give you an example. If you are in the car market, from 1 year to the next, factories can open and close, depending if people are buying cars or not, depending on how the economy is going. Average car in the United States, how old is the average car? Do you know? The average car on the road. Take a guess. I wish it were 6. It's about 12. That's bad news for who?
Car industry.
You got it. Who's it good news for? Consumers, and who else? Mechanics. Because you got to keep those cars on the road somehow. So the car market is very vulnerable. Something that is less vulnerable to recessions, for example, are services we cannot live without. For example, people, when they are getting low checks, are still buying milk and bread, and they still are relying on certain industries. So in terms of leverage, guys, in terms of the leverage we have, what leverage, generally speaking, do employers have over employees? When we say leverage, we mean, for example, if somebody's sitting on your chest and they're bigger than you, they got leverage over you. What leverage does an employer have over an employee? Yes?
They have the money.
Paychecks. And by the way, guys, most people in the United States, about 3/4 of people in the United States live one paycheck to the next. Scary statistic, and very few people have a savings account. So if you guys, you need your first job, for God's sake, start a savings account, because you'll be better off than most of the population. What other leverage do employers have over employees? Money, for sure. What else? Yes?
Don't they have the right to criticize your work if you're not working hard enough? They can potentially lay you off.
If you live in what's called a right-to-work state, it means if you are not otherwise a member of a legal protected class, somebody can come in and fire you at will. You're an employee at will. A great example would be, I am not a member of a protected class because I'm not, the only place I could be is if I were old enough to be protected by the Age Discrimination and Employment Act. If Father Malachi walked through that door today and said, Tonkin, we heard you talking about the eternal tap, and you and Logue have been drunk in class too many times, you're out of here, I would have virtually no legal recourse for that because I am an employee at will. What else? What other leverage do employers have over employees? Here's a question: where do most people get their health care and their retirement? You got it, man. If people in this country who don't have employer-provided health care generally don't have health care, and there are people who work strictly to get health care. It happens. What leverage do employees have over employers? Because we do. What leverage do we have? Yes?
Labor.
You got it. I mean, say for example, every teacher in your local school district said, we don't like our contract, we're walking out the door, what's not happening the next day? And what are the ripple effects of that? Say school gets canceled for 2 weeks while the union goes on strike. Who else is affected by that? Kids and the parents who have to take vacation days to take care of their kids or hire babysitters or otherwise take care of these kids. What other leverage do we have? We have leverage in the fact that if you're a 10-year employee of an organization and you walk out the door, you're taking 10 years of experience with you. So do not make the mistake of thinking that employees do not have leverage over their employers. We do. The difference between a union and non-union, however, is the individual versus the collective, which is exactly what we're going to be exploring. Now, you may have a philosophical opposition to joining a union. Some people even have religions that prohibit them from being members of unions. And some people ideologically want to negotiate for themselves. I support that view as well. But generally speaking, there are strength in numbers. Or there is strength in numbers, I should say. That being said, guys, we have reached the end of our time together. Before you go, do remember to post on our Chapter 1 assignment, which is your opinion about unions. So do the assignment. Don't worry about it being a book. Worry about you giving me your opinion and backing it up with a couple of sources.
What does that do?
That is due, I believe, I extended that next Wednesday, Corey, because I believe that we made that negotiation. No Monday homework, right? Correct?
Yes.
Yes. All right, guys, have a good day.